are you concerned at all that the Iranian regime may get to a point to where, I mean, obviously a bunch of people were killed, bunch of high-ranking people were killed last night, presumably more is coming. Can they get to the point to where they say, we have nothing to lose? There's no reason for us to restrain ourselves because otherwise we're all going to be destroyed. How worried are you about that?
Very, very worried. I mean, I think that their survival instinct is strong. And I don't think that they're going to go full on, like, we don't even care what happens to us. We just want to get back. I don't think they're going to go that route. But yes, right. At some point, if they decide that the United States is going to help Israel and the United States is not going to sit it out, then the incentive for Iran is to go against the United States hard, right? There's a perception around the world that the United States is a weak adversary. And this is something that the US has overcompensated for by trying to look stronger around the world in ways that are quite stupid, right? But they might have the incentive to try to hit us really, really hard, thinking that we'll decide if we get high costs, it's not worth it to us, and we'll back off, right? So, I would hope there's some chance for restraint. But if they decide that's gone, right, and that the US is basically, implicated anyway, or is going to attack Iran anyway, their smart move, which I certainly hope they don't do, would be to go hard against the United States to try to dissuade us from helping Israel further.
Now, what do you think that Iran will do? Because the Ayatollah said this is a declaration of war. Their president, which we showed at the top of this show here, said we will respond in a strong and powerful way. If they don't want, if they're focused on regime survival, and it seems like that would be the most likely of the two outcomes, then what can they do that would satisfy their claims that they're going to do something, but would not go so far as to precipitate something more, like especially with the U.S. joining in? Because it's hard for me to imagine anything that they could do that like killed any Israeli people that would not again prompt another strike from Israel, which would then you're in a war. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, there's no good options here, right? There's no good options for anyone. Frankly, there's no good options for Iran. And I would say it's not just about regime survival. It is about state survival from their standpoint, right? Like sometimes what's good for the regime is not good for the country. But this is a case where the country as a whole, if it wants to continue to exist as a functioning country and not turn into a failed state, right? That interest is kind of very much in line with the regime's interest, right? So yeah, they're gonna hit back hard. I mean, if they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't, right? If they don't, then they look bad internally, but it also allows Israel to hit them harder and harder and harder, right? If they do, it's going to incentivize Israel and possibly the United States to hit them harder and harder and harder. So yeah, I mean, this is a declaration of war. Like I've said it, and I think it's true that this is an equivalent in terms of a shock to the Iranian psyche. This is an equivalent to 9/11 for Iran, right? And it's not the same, but it's equivalent to that for them, right?
Well, yeah,
this is going to cause a huge rally around the flag effect.
You mentioned that earlier this morning. Yeah. That really got my attention because that has ramifications or implications, probably a better way to put it, because we all know what we felt on 9/11, and we certainly know what happened after that. And Gary showed you at this top of the show, again, lots of protesters out there, or supporters rather, for Iran out there taken to the streets in the thousands of them. And so they clearly feel this very seriously. And in the United States, when it happens, everybody expected George Bush to do something to solve this problem here. One would imagine that these folks here that you're now seeing on the screen have some interest in their country doing something too. So it seems that the regime is in a really tough spot here because they can't do nothing, because then they're going to gain the anger of their internal population. But if they do something too big outside, then they risk even more. So how do they navigate that with 9/11 vibes going on inside?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's really tough. And I think that the Iranian regime overall is rational. I think that the United States has a bad habit of portraying our enemies as irrational or as crazy, just sort of in general, like Putin, crazy, Kim Jong-un, crazy, Iran, crazy, Houthis, crazy, Saddam Hussein, crazy, right? They're actually quite rational and self-preserving. That said, they're under enormous stress right now, right? The regime has been hobbled, right? Not destroyed by any stretch, but seriously hobbled, right? They are incapacitated, probably for a short term rather than a long term perspective. And I'm sure people are really emotional and angry, right? Now, like when your national survival is at stake or your regime survival is at stake, that has a way of focusing the mind and sort of putting rationality in front of you and making people sort of operate under pressure. But by the same token, when you find out that close confidants of Khamenei have been killed, that's going to cause an emotional reaction. It's going to make people mad, and it's going to make them want revenge, right? Which probably doesn't play to their own interests, but is also a very human impulse that's hard not to indulge.
Yeah. And by the way, just as a reminder, folks, be sure and like and subscribe. That really helps us out a lot during this. And we appreciate you guys being with us today. I'm going to go to a related topic here that Trump has also been talking a lot about today. And that he is still saying, I want to have a negotiated outcome with Iran. Now, I know you studied Iran a lot. You're the Middle East expert for defense priorities. Tell us a little bit about how you feel the mentality, especially with these 9/11 vibes going on and the anger inside. What is the chance that they come to the table now to negotiate? And apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understood, they were willing to negotiate before on everything except no reprocessing. They said, we said that was a red line here of late. They said, we're not negotiating on that, but we will negotiate on these other things. Will they change their mind and negotiate on no reprocessing now?
No, zero chance, zero. Right? Because here's the thing, Trump leaned into the threat side of things, right? If you're trying to convince another country to do something you want them to do or not do, right? You have to threaten them with consequences if they don't do it. But then you also have to assure them that they won't pay the consequences if they do what you want them to do, right? That's the assurance problem. Like if I mug you by gunpoint, the assurance problem is I have to convince you that I'm not just going to shoot you after you give me your wallet, right? And that part, credibility of assurances, is completely gone from the United States, because we've basically shown them we don't control Israel, which we don't. Right? They would have been foolish if they ever thought we fully did, right? But we can't keep Israel at bay, right? So why are they going to trust any promise or pledge that we make to them? Even if we fully mean it in our deepest heart of hearts and are willing to back it up, if we can't keep Israel on side and away from doing this, then it's worthless to Iran, right? And that's going to be devastating going forward in the region. It's possibly devastating for U.S. credibility of assurances going forward, right?
Well, then in the credibility of the negotiating process itself, because I mean, if President Trump goes down this path and actually tries to send, I don't know if he's going to send Witkoff back. I know they had a meeting that's already been canceled, but if there's any future ones that come up, and he can't rein in the Israeli side, as you say, and they're not willing to go to zero processing, i.e. our red line, then what? I mean, is it possible that the United States would then say, okay, well, then we're going to act on our claim of red line and bombs will be falling, et cetera? I mean, how does Trump get out of this Gordian knot?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, Trump is a political escape artist, right? This guy's Houdini. What's unfortunate about it is that he puts himself into boxes that then he has to escape from, right? Like he creates bad situations, but then he miraculously escapes from them. So like, it's possible Trump can somehow find a way to get out of this problem. I think this is going to test even his sort of expert escape artist capabilities in this case.
A political Houdini. That's an interesting analogy there.
Yeah. On both the causing the problem and getting out. But this is a problem that's going to be really hard to escape from, and it's going to haunt us for a long time. And this is I think your point is this is going to be a long conflict, right? Israel has sort of said it's going to go on for weeks. I mean, that's sort of like best case scenario from Israel, right? I think this is going to go on much longer than that.
Now, interesting dynamic here in terms about what we knew, what we didn't know, what our plans were, what level of coordination. There was a statement made by Volodymyr Zelensky last week, I think it was. And he was bemoaning about the fact he didn't have enough air defense missiles, whatever. And he said recently that 20,000 missiles that were promised by the previous administration for air defense, especially anti-drone stuff, were redirected recently to the Middle East. And there has been a lot of speculation that that was in anticipation of Israel needing a bunch of those things. And so they had them redirected to give them to then. What does that tell you about whether we were or were not at least aware or helping Israel get ready for this?
It tells me about the sort of common human cognitive distortion of the I forget what it's called, but it's the bias where you think that there's an intent to something that probably doesn't actually have an intent, right? Which is, I don't think that we can infer accurately from any of the stuff that's happened or will happen whether the United States actually gave Israel a green light to go forward, right? And I think that's going to be a question that historians are going to debate for 50 years at least and may never know the answer to, right? The significant thing here is that what's in whose interest going forward. So it's in Israel's interest to suggest that the US was on side, that the US did know ahead of time, gave them a green light, et cetera, because Israel, not to be too cynical about it, but they want US help fighting Iran. And so if Iran retaliates against the United States, that's good for Israel, right? It's a place where Israeli interests and US interests are totally in opposition to one another, right? So Israel wants to suggest that the US was behind this, involved in this, moving pieces behind the scenes, right? The US should be playing down that possibility. We should be saying, or at least giving Iran political cover to pretend to believe that we were not the architect of this, or we were not behind this, if the US wants to avoid getting retaliated against by Iran. Sadly, Trump does not seem to be doing that. I think that, his own sort of, ego sort of personality quirks are such that he wants to boast, he wants to brag. He sees what looks like a short-term massive military success for Israel. I don't think it's going to be a success in the long term. In the short term looks pretty good. And he's like, yeah, I was behind that. I want to claim credit. But I think that impulse is actually going to really hurt US interests because we have no interest in claiming credit for this, right? Because we have no interest in getting drawn into this war.
Certainly, there had been some rumors, or at least some reports, sketchy reports, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, that apparently the Trump administration was starting to quietly move a lot of our troops out of Syria. Do you have any inside information about whether that's accurate or not? And whether it is or not, what do you think the chances are now that we would remove our troops from Syria?
I mean, I'll say I think we should remove our troops from Syria. I think that was the case before because I think, like you've said, they're sitting ducks for no good reason. And that's even more the case now. I don't know, I don't have information on that I can share or that I know about what's really sort of going on or what the intent is. I think the situation is so fluid that anything could happen. Right? We could put more troops in Syria. We could take all our troops out of Syria. It's just really unclear at this point. If we're wise, we should use it as an excuse to get out. But I don't know if we'll be wise. And, this is a president that doesn't ever want to look weak. And unfortunately, withdrawing for some people looks weak, even if it's the smart thing to do. It's not necessarily weak.